Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tokyo Living Podcast. We're back on Zoom today as I'm joined with my guest from Sendai. We've got Ben Shearon from Retired Japan on the show. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to it.
So I've got you on as an expert in sort of Japan finances and personal finances here, and I think the majority of the people that listen to the show are people that are in Japan for, I guess, a mid to sort of long term, and looking for ways to potentially optimize their financial position and optimize their finances. And so I thought you would be the perfect person to have come on and share some of your wisdom and knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I wouldn't say I'm an expert though. I mean, I basically know nothing. I started doing this 15 years ago, and then I realized that there was a lot of people here that didn't understand it either.
Yeah.
And then I made a website, and we kind of learned together. So,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
I did want to start just by getting, I guess, a brief background on your story in Japan and how you came about doing what you're doing at the moment.
yeah. Well, okay. So I came to Japan for 2 years, in the year 2000.
Yeah, I came for three in 2004. Common story.
Very common, I think. My kind of completely speculative take is that the people that come for like a year or two tend to stay, and the people who are like moving here forever tend to leave after 6 months.
Yeah, for sure.
All the long termers are kind of random, basically.
Yeah.
Yep. So I came on Jet, did a few years on Jet, and then transitioned to another teaching job, and then I lost my job, which is what got me interested in personal finance.
Mm, mm.
Because until then, I'd never really thought about money too much. Get the paycheck, spend the paycheck, have a nice time.
Yep,
But losing your job, that really focuses your attention a bit.
for sure.
Had to tell my wife that I wouldn't have a job in 3 months' time, and that was not a pleasant conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
So I basically decided that that wasn't going to happen again. Because
Yep.
the reason it was stressful is it was my fault. I wasn't prepared, and therefore I kind of made a promise to myself in the future, should something similar happen, it wouldn't be stressful and we'd be okay. And actually, I lost my job last year, and it was fine. So
Yeah,
it worked. It worked out.
yeah. What
That's
are
the
the
origin
things?
story.
Yeah. What are the things that you felt were that you were not prepared for? What ways did you feel like you're unprepared?
Well, I mean, the biggest one was not having any slack.
Yep.
So spending your entire paycheck, I think, is a really precarious situation. Obviously, spending more than your paycheck's even worse, where you're going into debt slowly over time.
Yep.
But if you haven't got any money left over at the end of the month, if you're not saving, if you haven't got emergency savings, you've got like a few months set aside. If you're not investing, then that's a pretty precarious situation. You're basically relying on life to continue being as it is.
Mm.
And in my experience, that's not a very realistic assumption.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, yeah, a lot of people were hit with that in the last few years where I guess most people's life didn't continue going the way it was. And yeah, I think that's probably a bit of a
Yeah, I
wake
mean,
up call for
pandemic
everyone.
is a perfect example, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen. So it makes sense to prepare yourself so that you're kind of financially resilient and you can
Mm,
deal with problems, basically.
yeah, yeah. And then how did you sort of progress from there to doing what you're doing now? And you started
Well,
sort of
yeah, I mean,
writing.
yeah. So I started trying to figure out personal finance for myself,
Mm,
and did that for a few years. And then I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was working as an English teacher in Japan, lovely guy. And he was telling me about his retirement plans, and how this advisory company in Tokyo had helped him buy these products. And the more I talked to him, the more angry I got, because obviously this wasn't a good fit for him.
mm, mm.
These were very expensive products that had been sold to him by someone who was basically taking advantage of the fact that my friend didn't understand what he was doing. And I went home and made the website that day just to to put information out there and help people in Japan understand what options they have.
Mm,
Because I think that's the important thing. If you understand all the options and how they're different, then you can make a decent choice. But if you don't, then you're going to buy the first thing that someone puts in front of you, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
rarely going to be in your interest.
yeah, yeah. And when you're giving people information about this, do you sort of have like different categories or ways that you sort of break it down, whether it's sort of investment or tax mitigation, or not mitigation, but tax utilization and saving methods? And do you have sort of a framework with how you'd sort of educate people on this stuff?
Well, it depends. Like, so the website grew very organically.
Mm.
So it started off as a blog, people commenting on the blog. Then we made a forum where people could join and post their own questions and answer questions and so on. And then recently, I've started doing individual coaching.
Yep.
And then making YouTube videos and so on. So
yeah. Yeah.
So the blog's a broadcast, the YouTube stuff's a broadcast. Most of the videos actually come from a question that someone asked me, though.
Yep.
It's really good to get those questions coming in, and then you've got, inspiration to make a video that is going to help at least one person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the coaching is completely tailored to the person. So
sure.
Whatever they need help with, we'll cover that in the session.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I do have a few sort of questions, or at least topics that I wanted to speak about. The first one is the Nenkin. I think that for people that are living here, they're paying into the Japanese Nenkin system, but they have got plans of going back to their home country or another country at some stage. How getting that Nenkin money out actually works, and how it works across different countries, and also with different timeframes of being in Japan. I know there's a lot in that, but what are the sort of the main points of, I guess, misunderstanding or things that people need to know about Nenkin?
Yeah, it's so important for people to understand this. And there's so much kind of misinformation online. Starting with, I think the two biggest misinformation things are it's optional in some way. It's not. So everyone has to join and pay into Nenkin. If your income's low enough, you can get special permission not to pay it. You get this menjo, which is basically an exemption from paying it, but you have to apply for that.
Right.
It's not automatic. And the other myth, I think, is that somehow it's all vaporware and it's gonna disappear in the next few decades.
Right.
And that's also not true. I mean, the Japanese pension fund is one of the biggest investment funds in the world. It's got trillions of yen in it. And the idea that the government would let the pension system disappear is ludicrous, right? Yeah. I mean, what government would survive that? So yeah. I think it's pretty safe that there will be some kind of Nenkin system in the future as well.
Yeah.
So having got past those two, how does the Nenkin system work? So the key thing is that if you've paid in for 120 months, so 10 years, you are entitled to get a pension from Japan.
Right.
And that's good because it used to be 25. So when I got here, it was 25 years. So if you'd paid in for 24 years and 11 months, you wouldn't get a pension.
Right.
So it's amazingly beneficial that they've lowered that limit to 10 years.
Yeah.
And that 10 years is also the limit for getting a refund.
Right. Okay.
So once that came in, and you can get a pension after 10 years, if you're entitled to get a pension, you can't get a refund.
Right. Okay.
If you haven't paid in enough to get a pension and you leave Japan permanently, you can apply for a refund of some of your contributions.
Okay.
And what that looks like is you can get 5 years worth back.
Right. Okay.
So if you've paid in for 4 years, you get all your contributions back. If you've paid in for 8 years, you get 5 years of contributions back, and 3 years are cancelled. So it's quite important to think about whether you might come back in the future. So if you've paid in 9 years, for example, and there's zero chance of coming back, then yes, you should get the refund because 9 years worth of contributions isn't worth anything.
Yeah.
But if there's a chance you're going to come back, those 9 years are worth more than the refund amount would be.
Sure. Yeah.
In terms of qualifying for future pension. And the way the Japanese pension works is that it's paid out proportionally to how much you've paid in.
Right.
So on Kokumin Nenkin, the kind of base pension, 40 years is a full pension, 40 years of contributions. So you basically have to start when you're 20 some and pay until you're 60 some.
Yeah. Okay. And what is there an age limit at when you're eligible for that pension to start?
Yeah, Obviously this is in flux all over
Yeah.
the world, because we've got these longer lifestyles now. But the base age is 65.
Right.
So the normal pension age is 65. That's when you would get your pension. And if you get your pension statement every year, you can normally see either a projection of what your pension is going to be, or as you get closer, the actual amount.
Yeah.
You probably get the Nenkin Teikibin once a year around your birthday. You get a postcard or a letter that basically lists out your contributions. On there, you can see what your Nenkin is going to be.
Yeah.
However, in Japan, you have the option to take it earlier. You can take it from 60.
Okay.
But in that case, it's going to be reduced. And it's never going to go up again. So if you take it early, it'll be reduced by something like 30%. And that's your pension for life. So that's normally not a good idea, because obviously your pension is kind of insurance against living for a very long time, because it's paid by the government for as long as you live. So reducing that's not a good idea. And you can actually take it later. So you can do the opposite.
Yeah.
You can take it at the moment as late as starting from 75.
Okay.
At which point you get a much larger pension.
Okay. That's good to know.
And if you can afford to do that, that might make sense. Because again, you're insuring against living for a really long time. And basically getting a pension from the government every month in cash is in some ways better than having investments, especially as you get older.
Yeah.
If you're 90 and you're not really capable of managing money and dealing with the brokers online and stuff, then just getting that government paycheck is probably going to be better than having some kind of portfolio. So if you can use your savings to bridge the gap to 75, defer the pension, and then have that larger pension for the rest of your life, that might make sense for some people.
Okay. If you have sort of crossed over that 10 years though, and then you do leave the country, you basically that money's gone.
No, you can claim a pension. So when you get to 65 or 60, if you want to take it early, you just apply for a pension normally, and they would send it to a foreign bank account.
Okay.
So it's actually pretty good. There's loads of Japanese people who choose to move overseas for retirement for lower costs, and they get their pensions paid out normally to wherever they're living. So same system for foreign nationals. If you've paid in and qualified, just make sure you don't lose your pension number.
Yep.
And then when you reach the appropriate age, you just do some paperwork and they'll start paying the pension out normally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know. Is there anything else regarding the Nenkin that that you experience people having questions with, or you think that people should know?
Well, there's not a lot of but there's a couple of things. Like if you pay Kokumin Nenkin, for example, there's a system called Fuka Nenkin, kind of extra Nenkin, where you can pay an extra 400 yen a month. And your eventual pension will go. But mathematically, it's a great deal and it's very easy to do. So I normally recommend people do that. So if you're on Kokumin Nenkin, you should probably look at joining Fuka Nenkin as well.
Yeah. So and then what would that sort of roughly equate to upon retirement? The extra 400 yen a month.
The extra. So you pay 400 yen a month.
Yeah.
And you get an extra 200 yen a year in retirement.
Okay.
And it sounds stupid because it's a tiny amount of money, but you're basically getting a 50% return on that 400 yen. It's amazing mathematically.
Yeah.
It's such a small amount of money that. So I think it's worth doing, but it's not going to be life changing.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing about Nenkin is that Nenkin allows you to use the Ideco system.
Right.
The kind of self-managed investment pension. And that's actually a really good idea for a lot of people as well.
The next question I had was in regards to Furusato Noze, which I've been sort of using for the last couple of years, which I think many listeners and viewers are probably familiar with. But for those that aren't, can you sort of explain briefly, basically how that works?
Yeah, so Furusato Noze is, I think, an unintended consequence.
Yes.
So it started off as an idea where people who moved to the city, say, could send some of their tax money back to their hometown so that the hometown could benefit from those funds, basically. And then they kind of started trying to incentivize it. I think actually it wasn't even an incentive to start with. Probably the hometown thought, oh, that was very nice of someone to send us their tax money, so we'll give them a little present back. It's the kind of okaishi.
Yeah.
And then people started trying to game it. So the towns were kind of competing with each other to give better and better presents so that they could get more. Because you don't have to send it to your hometown. You can send the money anywhere you like in Japan. And so the government's gradually been cracking down on the extent. So I think the gifts now are much less generous than the gifts were a few years ago, for example.
Right. Yeah.
I think they're not allowed to pay out more than, I think, something like 30% of the value.
Right.
In gifts. So how it works is it's basically you go shopping with your tax money.
Yeah.
So you go online. There's lots of sites that kind of aggregate the gift offers and so on. And you buy some gifts, normally with a credit card. And then at the end of the year, you get a kind of receipt for that, and you can submit it with your taxes. And if you meet certain criteria, you can do what's called the one-stop system, where you don't really have to do any paperwork. They file your taxes for you, and you get a refund of some of your local inhabitants' tax.
Right.
There's a base 2,000 yen fee, so it costs you 2,000 yen, as it were, to use the system. And then basically you're going shopping with the government's money.
Yeah. Yep.
But you're buying overpriced things. So
yes.
It's not market value. They're much below market value, but it's not your money, so it kind of works out. Everyone gets really excited about Furusato Nose, especially Japanese people, in my experience. And I think that's not really justified.
Right.
But for me, Furusato Nose is nice. It's not massively compelling. And there's so many other things that you could do to improve your finances.
Yep.
That people don't do. So they get. I think it's easy to understand Furusato Nose. You can get some free meat, or you get free beer.
Yep.
But I think there's quite a few things that people should be doing before that.
Yeah, sure.
If possible.
If people are looking to do the Furusato Nose, what sort of percentage of their tax? I know there's sort of different, calculators and things online, which I think people it's pretty easy to find. But roughly, what are people looking at?
So you're looking at your local inhabitants' taxes.
Yep.
And if your salary's consistent from year to year, you can just look at your last year's tax return.
Yep.
And see how much it is, and then maybe don't do slightly less.
Yep.
As your thing, because the thing is, what you're doing is you're paying using your own money, and then you're getting a refund.
Yeah.
And if you end up paying more than the available refund, you're just out of pocket.
Yeah, sure.
And you're buying stuff for 3 times the market price. So be very careful not to do that.
Yeah. And sorry, it's 10% of your inhabitants' tax. Is that right? Or
so local inhabitants' tax is roughly 10% of your taxable income.
Yep.
But you really need to look at the actual numbers, because your taxable income is, after you do all your deductions and so on.
Yeah.
So it's not your gross income, or even the income that you know what I mean? So you really need to look at those numbers. And if your income fluctuates, if you're a freelancer, or you have bonuses, or you're on commission or something, then it's probably worth being a bit conservative and not trying to, spend as much as you can on Furusato Nose, just to make sure you don't go over, end up paying more.
Sure.
One other thing about Furusato Nose is that donations. So if you donate money to charity or to political parties and so on, that uses the same tax allowance as Furusato Nose.
Okay.
So it's one pool, and you can either spend it on stuff or you can give it to charity, but they're using up that same pool. So just be aware of that as well.
That's actually, a good point, which I wasn't aware of. Yeah. Is there anything else that would sort of come under that umbrella that people should be aware of?
Because I think as far as I know, it's just those two. Because it was originally the charitable donations bucket, and then basically Furusato Nose is a form of charitable donation to a local authority. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess just a tip from my end on Furusato Nose, don't do it on the 31st of December when you're in a rush.
Because you won't get the one-stop system, yeah.
Well, yeah, but also last year, my wife and I did it when we were on vacation back in Australia. So, oh, shit, we would do our Furusato Nose thing. Anyway, I think I didn't sort of look at the items as carefully as I should have, and we ended up getting brown rice instead of white rice, which I like brown rice. Our kids don't, so we've got, I think, 20-kilo bags of brown
So
rice at
you
home.
have to eat all of that then.
Yeah, I have to eat all of that, and then also we bought a lot of almond milk, and we usually get sort of 1 liter cartons of almond milk and use it ingredients and things. And but I didn't check the actual sizes, so we end up getting like the little 80 ml things of almond milk, which is very inconvenient if you're trying to mix it in like with eggs and things like that. So do it well in advance, and yes, just
read the terms and conditions carefully. Yeah.
And I think in its 5 municipalities that you're allowed to donate to at a time per year. Is that correct?
I think that's to qualify for the one-stop system.
Okay, right.
So you can donate to more, but at that point, you now have to do a tax return.
Right. Okay.
And for most people who are salaried workers, they don't normally do a tax return. The company does it for them. So
yeah. Okay.
They probably want to avoid that, just in terms of, you know, an unnecessary visit to the tax office. Yeah. Although you can do it online now. It's actually quite easy to do your taxes online.
Yeah. I guess the one, I must have used that sort of one-stop shop. And then I know at the sort of start of the year when my accountant's doing my tax, they just asked me to send through all the slips that are sent out by the different municipalities. Yeah.
Right. If you're doing a tax return, you won't be using the one-stop system. So
right.
The one-stop system is a way for the local authorities to file your taxes, and so you don't need to do a tax return.
Okay.
If you do a tax return, you submit the receipts normally, and so you're probably not restricted to 5 cities if that makes a difference.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'll need to check the site that I'm using for that. Yeah. What about sort of investment strategies that can have tax implications? In particular, things like NISA and things like that.
Super timely. Because you probably know next year we're getting a new NISA system, which is a huge improvement on the current one. So I'm really excited about that. There's also IDECO, which is has really good tax benefits. But before we talk about that, I need to talk about Americans.
Yes.
So
probably a favorite topic for an Australian and a Brit to talk about is good old Americans.
Ideally, Americans would understand this already, but they don't. I don't know why no one tells them. But basically, US citizens, because of US tax laws, are really limited in what they can do in Japan. So mainly in the form of investments. So it's very hard to invest in Japan if you're a US citizen. By far, the easiest thing to do is just to invest with an American company. So invest in the US if you have an account already. If you don't have an account already, there's a company called Interactive Brokers Japan.
Yep.
So they were spun off from Interactive. Interactive Brokers used to operate in Japan without being registered in Japan, but the government gave them a slap last year, I think, and now they have a separate company that works in Japan. But that's a good option for Americans.
Okay.
Anything else we talk about? So any of these accounts, the NISA accounts, the IDECO accounts, buying stuff with Japanese brokers, is really hard. We've got a page on the website if people want to look into that. But just wanted to say that because whenever I talk about stuff, I get people shouting at me because they can't use it. And
Okay.
I just wanted to get ahead of that this time.
But that only applies to Americans.
It's only Americans,
citizens of other countries.
And the reason is because America taxes people worldwide based on their nationality.
Yep.
And pretty much every other country taxes people who live in that country, and not people that don't live in that country. And by taxing people worldwide, you create all these problems because you've got overlapping taxation.
Yeah, sure.
So, so everyone who's not American, you've got these great options in Japan. They really are. I talk to people in Europe, and they're so jealous of what we have access to here.
Yeah.
Japan is a really great place to be an individual investor because it's very easy. There's no paperwork. Even in a taxable account, the broker will do all your taxes for you. There's nothing to report. There's no paperwork to fill out. It's really very nice. Tax-wise, you've got these 2 big tax-exempt accounts. So you've got IDECO, which is a retirement account. You can't access it before you're 60.
Okay.
So your money's locked away. But in exchange for that, you get to reduce your taxable income.
Right.
So you're reducing your income tax, your local inhabitants tax, probably your health insurance and your pension, which is great.
Yeah.
So if you're willing to put that money away until you're 60, you get all these benefits now. And that's really nice. So that anyone who's paying into Nenkin pretty much can use that. And how much you get depends on what kind of Nenkin you're paying.
Right.
So currently, if you're a public servant or a teacher or a doctor or someone who's in a Kyosai, you can only pay in 12,000 yen a month.
Okay.
Into Ideco. And the reasoning there is, these are the people that have the best jobs and pensions, so they don't need this additional stuff. And then normal salaried workers, people who pay Kosei Nenkin, but are not in a Kyosai, they get 23,000 yen a month. And then people paying Kokumin Nenkin, so freelancers and self-employed people, they get 68,000 yen a month that they can put into Ideco.
Okay.
And that reduces their taxable income by like 60 odd thousand yen a year.
Yeah.
Which is huge, right? And that's your marginal tax rate that you're saving there. So it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's the first option. And then the second option is NISA.
Yeah.
And NISA is an investment account. And the government made it to try to encourage people to like stop hiding money in their closet and put it in the stock market instead.
Yeah.
And how NISA works is you can put in a certain amount of money. There's no real tax advantage when you put the money in, but any dividends and any capital gains are not taxed.
Right.
So normally in Japan, dividends and capital gains are taxed at a flat rate of 20.315%.
Yep.
But in a NISA account, there's no tax. So if you have a really good stock market pick and you triple your money, there's no tax to pay at all.
Yeah, regardless of how much you pay. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's there is no reason not to use NISA. Ideco, maybe you don't want to tie your money up. Maybe you're not sure if you're going to be here in the long term. That's fine. But NISA, if you're going to invest anyway, you should invest in NISA, because why pay tax if you don't need to?
Yeah, yeah. And how hard is it to sort of set up the NISA accounts? And
so the big hurdle for most people is the application.
Yeah.
So basically, Japanese stockbrokers, all of them operate in Japanese. I don't know any that have English interfaces or English applications. So you have to go through the application process in Japanese.
Yeah.
And they're getting much less restrictive. I mean, they used to like give you a little test. They'd call you up and see if your Japanese seemed good enough on the phone.
Okay.
But recently that's not happening as much.
Right.
So now it's basically you do an online application. And then provided your name fits in the right boxes, it's very easy. If your name doesn't fit in the right boxes, there's a bit more back and forth.
Yeah.
And then for a taxable account, it's going to be less than a week to open an account. For NISA, it takes about a month maybe. And Ideco takes a long time because they have to go through the Nenkin office. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. It takes between 2 and 3 months at the moment to open an Ideco account.
Yeah.
And you can do all three with the same application. So you apply to a broker. And normally I'd recommend using one of the online brokers.
Yeah.
So you can go through your bank, but they're going to have higher fees and they're not going to have the same range of products. And banks tend to like call you up and try and sell you stuff.
Right.
Whereas a broker doesn't care. That's not their business model. Their business model is to provide cheap services to millions of people. So they're not trying to sell stuff.
Yeah.
Use an online broker. And then with the one application, you can apply for a taxable account and a NISA account and an Ideco account all at the same time. Okay. So it's pretty easy.
And what are some of the common online brokers that you see foreigners using?
So you've got Rakuten Securities. Yep. Part of the Rakuten group, but they're going to spin it off. So people worried about the future of the Rakuten group. This is the only profitable part of that conglomerate.
Right.
Rakuten Securities. So I think it's fine.
Yep.
There's also SBI,
Okay.
SBI Securities, and Monex Securities, and then there's Matsui Securities. So those are the four big ones, really.
Yep. Okay.
And they're all very, very similar. So there's a lot of competition. They match each other's fees and so on. So the fees have been coming down ever since I've been using them. And there's I couldn't really tell you that one was better than the other, except if you're in the Rakuten points ecosystem already.
Right.
It might make sense to do that because you'll get whatever, your SPUs or whatever they're called.
Sure. Okay.
And then Shinsei Bank. Lots of people use Shinsei because they have English language support. And Shinsei is linked with Monex.
Okay. Right. Well, that's good to know. Any other sort of advice on those sort of NISA and iDeCo?
In terms of investing in them.
Yep.
So one thing that Japan has is that mutual funds in Japan are allowed to reinvest the dividends internally.
Right.
So that's the main difference between buying a mutual fund, say, and buying an ETF.
Yep.
So an ETF will pay the dividends out. So every quarter or every few months, you'll get your dividends. They'll either be taxed or not. So if they're in a NISA account, they wouldn't be taxed. If they're in a taxable account, you'd pay 20% tax on the dividend, and then you could spend it or reinvest it. But a mutual fund can just reinvest the dividend by themselves. It's not paid out. There's no tax due. And the fund just grows larger. So all things being equal, it's probably better to use a mutual fund and reinvest the dividends because you'll grow more over time. You'll pay less in tax.
Sure. Okay.
And actually in iDeCo and in parts of NISA, you can only use mutual funds.
Okay. That's great.
And then it's the usual, start slow. Like do not like rush in and invest all your savings. Because because then you screw it up and you panic and you sell and then you never invest again, and that's bad.
Yeah.
So start really slowly. There's no rush at all. Buy some things, see how they perform, see how you feel, because it's all about how you deal with the movements and so on. And the more you learn, then you can ramp it up over time.
Yeah. Just in terms of the tax on capital gains, that doesn't apply to cryptocurrency. Is that correct? Cryptocurrency is a bit different.
So cryptocurrency at the moment is considered the same as currency trading, so FX trading, right? So and that is classified as miscellaneous income. So it's basically added to your income and then you pay income tax.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're that the income tax gets pretty high quite quickly. So many people are hoping that Japan will reclassify crypto so that it's treated as an investment with a capital gain rather than miscellaneous income.
Right.
Then you'd pay the flat 20%.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
But at the moment, it's basically miscellaneous income. So you want to probably manage that so that you're not going into the highest tax brackets.
Yeah, sure.
And the other problem with that is that it's going to determine your health insurance and your pension and all the other things that are based on your income. So
yeah. What else? Any other sort of tips that you have for people managing their finance?
Well, the thing is, I think there's different groups of people. Yeah. So there's people that haven't given any thought to this stuff yet. And generally, we find that they come and find retired Japan when they're in their 30s or 40s.
Yep.
You're like, oh, shit, I'm an adult now.
Yes.
And then you've got people who have done this elsewhere, but they don't understand how Japan works.
Yeah.
And for those kinds of people, then I'd just say come to the forum and ask questions or maybe watch some YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And then you've got people who have everything sorted, but they want kind of more information.
Yeah.
But it's very simple. People have this idea that investing is complicated.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of people who make money from making people believe that it's complicated.
Yeah, absolutely.
The whole industry, basically. It's like, hey, it's really hard. We'll do it for you. You just pay us, this tiny 1% fee. 1% fee is enormous, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just super simple. But mainly it's getting started and it's continuing. So it's I'm sure it's incredibly similar to health and physical fitness, It's like, it's not rocket science. It's just do something sensible for a really long time.
Yeah,
and just do it every day or every month. Continue doing it, and you'll get the benefits. So
terrific.
It's kind of ironic because I found the money stuff came quite easily once I started focusing on it, but I really struggle with consistency in training and health. So.
Really?
yeah. And
wow.
it should just transfer, right? It's the same skill set, but no, somehow.
Not necessarily. a lot of people have those same sort of challenges for sure. Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you very much for coming on today. You mentioned the YouTube videos that you do and the website. I don't think you've mentioned the podcast. We'll obviously put links to all those in our show notes. But for people that can't be bothered looking at the show notes, what are the links to those sites? What's your website and how do people find you on YouTube and podcasts?
Oh, okay. So if you just look for Retire Japan,
yep,
everywhere you'll find it. So retirejapan.com is the website, Retire Japan on YouTube, Retire Japan on your favorite podcasting platform. So.
Yep. Fantastic. Well, I've learned a lot just from that episode, and I'm looking forward to putting some of those strategies in place, and I'm sure that the listeners and viewers have done so also. So, many thanks for your time today, and perhaps we'll get you on back on the show again sometime in the future.
Definitely. Once the new NISA starts, actually, it might be a good time to go over how that works for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Cheers.